We start with the development of these cards. The first thing, obviously, would be to install the Bootstra framework in our project. So we go to our code editor, and here I'm going to create a second folder for this second video. And I'm going to name it Recipe Cards. Once the folder is created, we are going to create 3 files. The first one could be the HTML document. The second file could be our style sheet. And in this case, we wouldn't be using the JS file because it's not necessary. So we're not going to create it. We go to the HTML document, and here we are going to place the basic structure of a document. The next step would be to install Bootstra. For that, we go to the documentation, go to the introduction section, and we scroll down a bit to copy the links. Once we are in the CDN section, we are going to copy the style sheet. We go to the HTML document, place the link tag, and in the href attribute, we paste the link. We will do the same with the JS file. So we copy the link, go to the HTML document, and here, before the body tag, the closing tag, we place the script tag with the src attribute, and inside this attribute we paste it. We save the changes, and with this, we have finished installing Bootstra in our project. The next step would be to download the images that I am leaving as a resource in this class. It could be these images together. We are going to copy them with Ctrl+C. We go to our recipe cards folder, and here we create a folder called Assets. And inside this folder, we are going to create another folder called Image. And it is here where we are going to paste the images that we have copied. And now we start with the development. Obviously, the first thing we are going to do is to create a section to contain these 3 cards. And then here inside, we are going to incorporate the container class to define the margins on the sides. So we place the div with the container class, and inside we could already create a row that contains our 3 columns. Since there are 3 columns, we are going to create 3 out of 4. We put col lg4 and we multiply it by 3. Although we are only going to work on one, and then when we finish the first one, we copy and replicate it for the others. And inside we are going to use a Bootstra card. So we put a div with a card class. And inside, the first element of the card would be the label that is at the top, protruding from the card. And for that, we create a div with the card label class. And here inside, we are going to place the text of the label, which in my case, I am going to put Delish. I'm going to save the changes. The next step could be to link our style sheet to our HTML document. For that, we place the link tag here. Obviously, this in lowercase. And here we link our style.css. I'm going to save the changes, start our server, check our project, and as you can see here, we are already seeing our card. So, the next step, obviously, is to center the card vertically and horizontally. For that, we inspect the element, and we check the section tag. We expand the body. And as you can see here, the section tag would only have the height relative to its content. It's an automatic height. So, if we want the section tag to cover the entire height of the screen, we go to our style sheet, and here we create a class to be able to create that interaction. The class will be named HV100. We put opening and closing braces, we define the height property, and we set it to 100 BH. BH, which is viewport height. We add the important expression. I'm going to save the changes, copy the class, and we are going to paste it as a class in the section tag. I'm going to save the changes, check our project, and as you can see here, the section tag would already have the entire height of the screen. If we check the child elements that this section has inside, we see that the div with the container class does not occupy the height of its parent container, nor does the row. To be able to fix this, we go to the HTML document, and here in the container class, we are going to place the H100 class, which is a Bootstra class, that sets a height of 100%. The same goes for the row. Now we are going to save the changes, check, and as you can see, the container class already occupies the entire height of its parent container, the same as the row. The next step would be to ensure that the card is centered vertically and horizontally. For that, we would achieve it through Flexbox. We locate ourselves in the row, and first, we put the deflex class, and finally, we are going to place justify content. We put the justify content center class. I'm going to save the changes, check, and with this class, What we have done is horizontal centering. Now we would need vertical centering. That is achieved through the Align Items Center class. We save the changes, check our project, and as you can see, now the cart would already be aligned vertically and horizontally. Now we could proceed with the design of the cart. We check that the design has borders on the sides and also has a slight rounded border at the corners. So well, for that, we go to our style sheet and here we are going to modify the Bootstra cart class. Already here, we are going to put opening and closing braces, and the first thing would be to remove the borders. For that, we add the border property and we set it to 0 pixels or we set it to none. I'm going to save the changes, check our project, and as you can see, we wouldn't be seeing any borders here anymore. The next step would be to define at least one background color to be able to see the dimensions it has. Let's use the same color. So for that, we go to the same rule and we place the background color property. And we set it to F2, F2, F2. I'm going to save the changes, check our project, and as you can see, we would already be seeing at least one background color there. The next step would be to remove the rounded borders, or decrease them. We put the border radius property and we set it to about 2 pixels. We check the results and it would be perfect. About the background color, we are also going to change it because I don't like the entire white color. So we go to the style sheet and we are going to modify the rule of the body tag. We put opening and closing braces, we place the background color property, and we set it with a hexadecimal color of E6, E6, E6. We save these changes, check the project, and as you can see, it could practically have the same style as the cart we are guiding ourselves from. Now we move on with the most interesting part about this cart, which is the blue label at the top. We see that the characteristic is that it's outside the cart and also the ends have a particular design. We see a rounded border and also something inclined. And we achieve this through images, because the sides of this container would simply be images, which in fact we will have in our assets folder, image folder, and they would be these 2 images. So well, knowing this, we go to our HTML document and we see that that tag would be inside a div with the cart label class, which we should copy. And we are going to define its rule. We put opening and closing braces, and here we are going to start with the position of this element. We see that again, it would be at the top outside of the cart. To do this, we handle absolute and relative positions. To the cart, which is the parent container of that label, we are going to give it the relative position. So we place that property and we set it to relative. And after this, to the label that we are going to move outside, we are going to place the absolute position. If we check our project, we could be seeing something different. And it is that now we don't see the outline or the background color of the cart. This happens because the only element that the cart has inside would be the cart label tag. So, by setting this element with an absolute position, it's treating it as if it's not inside the cart. And since there's nothing inside, obviously we don't see anything at all. To have a reference close to the content, let's temporarily add the cart body class. I'm going to save the changes, check our project, and as you can see, we could be seeing the cart again. The next step would be to place this text at the top outside of the cart, as it is precisely in the design. For that, we go to the cart label rule, and we are going to set the top property to about -32 pixels. Let's try it. I'm going to save the changes, check our project, and as you can see, we would already be seeing that label outside of the cart. The next step would be to adjust it to the right side. For that, we place the right property, and we set it to 24 pixels from the right side. I'm going to save the changes, check the project, and as you can see, it would be on the right side now. The next step would be to give it the background color. For that, again, to this same rule, we are going to add the background color property, and we are going to set the following hexadecimal code, which is 445E83. Here it is, 83. I'm going to save the changes, check our project, and as you can see, we would already be seeing our label with the same background color. Now we move on to giving it dimensions. How is it here? We see it's rectangular. So for this, we go again to the rule and we set it to have a minimum width. We put the min width property to about 100 pixels. I'm going to set it to 105 pixels approximately, and also to have a minimum height. Sorry, let's set a maximum width, a max width instead, and it should have a maximum of 240 pixels. I'm going to save the changes, check the project, and as you can see, we have increased the length of the card. The next step could be to center the content, I mean the text. For that, we will use Flexbox. We place the display property. We set it to flex, and to center it horizontally, we put the justify content property and we set it to center. Now, to align it vertically, we use align items and we set it to center. Save the changes, check, and as you can see, it could be aligned. Finally, to remove the separation between the label and the card, we will define a default height for this section. We put the height property, and let's try to set it to about 32 pixels. I'm going to save the changes, check, and as you can see, there will no longer be that separation. Finally, to adjust this, we will define a few more properties. We add button, we set the button property to automatic, and finally, the left property also set to automatic. If we save the changes, check, we will have this as a result. Next, before moving on to the corners, we'll change the font. For that, I'm also providing these two fonts as downloadable resources, so we'll cut them. We go inside the assets folder, we create a folder called fonts and paste them there. We're going to import these fonts into our project, so for that we go to our style sheet, and at the top we put the font face rule. Here it is. It adds two properties. First, we'll give a name to the font. I'll use the same name as the file. I'll start with Cerebri Sans. So I copy the name and paste it here. Finally, in the URL function, we put the location of that font. So for that, we enter the assets folder, fonts folder, and we select this font. I'm going to save the changes, and now I'm going to wrap this text inside a span tag, and I'll paste it here. I'm going to save the changes. The next step would be to change the font of that text. For that, we go into its parent container, which is card label, and inside this element, there could be a span tag. And we are going to change the font of this element, which is this. I'll scroll up a bit, copy this line, and I paste it here. We add the important expression, save the changes, check, and as you can see, we have changed the font. The next step would be to increase the thickness a bit. I'll put the font weight property, and we set it to 900. Save the changes, check, and you can see it's a bit thicker now. I'm also going to change the text color and increase the spacing between each letter. For that, first the color. I'll put the color property and we set it to white. Finally, to increase the spacing between each letter, we put the letter spacing property and we set it to 1 pixel of separation. We check, and as you can see, it's here. But I think the font size should be a bit smaller. I'll put the font size property to 0.9 rem. Check the project, and as you can see, there it is, perfect. Now let's move on to the corners. Well, I mentioned that we are going to do this using images, but we will also be using the after and before pseudo elements. Let's start with the left side using the before pseudo element. So we'll go to our style sheet, we copy the container, go to the button, and we add the before pseudo element. We put opening and closing braces, and the first thing would be to put the content property and we set it as an empty string. The next step would be to set the background image. For that, we use the background image property, the URL function, and we call the image that could be inside. We'll add a dot, slash, we enter the assets folder, image folder, and here would be the image for the left side, left-round.svg. Now we'll move on to setting dimensions. For that, we'll use the width property. I'll set it to have the same height as the card label. We'll check, and it's 32 pixels. So I'll set the height to 32 pixels. And for the width, I'll set it to 24 pixels. I'm going to save the changes. Well, right now I'm going to save the changes to see what happens. Let's go to the project, and as you can see, we don't see anything at all. Let's go back to the style sheet. And to at least see a minimum change, we'll add the position property, and we should also set it to absolute position, like the container. So, if we save the changes now, check, As you can see, on this side, we're already seeing the image covering the text. If we want it placed on the left side, we'll set the left property to -32. I'll set it to 22 pixels. I'm going to save the changes, check the project, and as you can see, the image is now placed correctly on the left side. Now we have to do the same for the right side, which is practically the same. We'll copy this rule, and here instead of before, we add the after pseudo element. Here we make some corrections. Instead of left, we'll set it to the right side. I'll save the changes. We'll see if we're missing something. Oh, and changing the name of the image. Here it could be right-round.svg. We save the changes, check, and as you can see, here's the image. But we see a line on the side. This is a continuation of the same image. So, to prevent it from repeating, we set the background repeat property and we set it to no repeat. Save the changes, check, and as you can see, now it's not repeating. Let's continue with the second section of the card, which is the card header. For that, we'll go to our HTML document, and before the card body, we'll add the card header class. And inside, we'll add our title using the h3 tag. I'll put a lorem of about 4 words. I think 4 is perfect. I'll save the changes. The font we're seeing here is called Column, which is in Google Fonts. Let's search for it. As you can see, it's in Google Fonts. We enter it. Once we're here, we press the Get Font button and we'll get it through a code. Once entered here, we copy all these links or tags, which are 3. We'll go to the HTML document and we paste them above here. We'll check for any corrections. In this case, we only need to indent. I'll save the changes. Now the next step is to go into the card header class, and we'll change the font of the h3 title inside, using the font family property. And in double quotes, we put the name, which is called column. We'll save the changes, check the project, and as you can see, we've changed the font of the title. I'll increase the length of this string, and I'll also remove a border at the bottom, because by default, Bootstra adds a bottom margin to titles. We see that there's a different spacing at the top here. If we inspect the element now, we can check that spacing here. So for that, we go to the h3, precisely this rule, and we add the margin bottom property and we set it to 0 pixels. Save the changes, and now we'll move on to modifying the length. I'll now put a lorem of 6 words. We save the changes, check, and as you can see, there could be 2 lines. We check the design, and here we are noticing that there are 2 horizontal lines in the text. Well, these lines could be images that we will have inside the assets, image folder, and here it could be called line.png. So we'll go back to our CSS document and we'll add those lines using CSS. For that, we do it through the card header. We put opening and closing braces, and for that, we put the background image. We'll use the URL function and we call the image. We enter the assets folder, image folder, and it could be called line.png. Since there are 2 lines, we add another function, or a second image. And here with the same path. We save the changes, check, and here we will have as a result the lines repeated many times. To limit this to just 2 lines, we'll go back to the rule and we put the background position property. Here it is. And we'll set the first image to be on the left side at about 51 pixels. And the second image also on the left side, but at about 21 to 24 pixels. We add a space. I'm going to save the changes, check the project for now. There could be no change. To make it work, we'll add the background repeat property, and we set the property to repeat X on the X-axis. We check the project, and as you can see, now we're only seeing 1 line. If we want to see the other one, we'll have to increase the height of the card, or the card header, but we won't do that. Instead, we'll implement it through an inner margin. We add a padding top of 1 rem, and on the bottom, a padding bottom also of 1 rem. I'll save the changes, check, and as you can see, now we're seeing 2 lines there, the first and the second, but they're not in the correct order. The correction for this is to modify the line height of the text or title. So for that, in the h3, we put the line height property, and we set it to 3 rem. I'll save the changes, check, and as you can see, Now the text is aligned with the two lines. We'll now continue by adding the cover photo and also the sticker that could be in the middle of the card header with the image. For that, we go below the card header and we'll add our HTML tag, calling the image that could be inside the assets, image folder, and it could be called banner-1.webp. I'll save the changes, we check our project, and as you can see, we're already seeing the cover photo. The next step could be to add the sticker between these two. To achieve this, we'll obviously use relative and absolute positions. The question here now is, which element or tag I'm going to apply the relative position to, and which other tag I'm going to apply the absolute position to. Obviously, to apply the relative position, I should put it inside a div. And since this tag is currently not inside a container, we'll have to incorporate it into one. Let's create a class called card.img, and inside it we'll place the image we've created. And to this container outside the HTML tag, we'll apply the relative position. We can do this through the position relative class, which is from Bootstra. Then we move on with the most important part, which is to place that image in the middle of the card header with the cover photo. We can achieve this through the pseudo element called before in the card.img tag. So we'll copy it, we go to the style sheet, we put a dot and paste it. We'll call the before pseudo element. The first property we'll incorporate here could be the content property as an empty string. After that, we'll place the image. For that, it could be the background image property. The URL function, we enter the assets folder, image folder, and here the image could be called sticker.png. I'll save the changes, and after this, we'll manage the dimensions of this image. We'll set the width to about 170 pixels, and the height to about 50 pixels. I'll save the changes and we'll check our project to see what we're seeing. In this case, we see that the image has completely deformed. It exceeds the dimensions of the parent container. To correct this, we'll go to the HTML document, and here in the HTML tag, we'll add the class attribute with the class W100. We'll save the changes, check, and as you can see, it returns to the initial style. The detail is that we still can see the image. For that, we go to the rule. We'll set this image to have an absolute position. And after that, we'll place it at the top. We'll set the top property to minus 24 pixels at the top of that card. We'll check the project, and as you can see, now we're seeing our image. We've set the top minus 24 pixels property so that the image is at the top, protruding a small strip at the top of the card header. Finally, we need to center this image horizontally. For this, we go back here, and we set the left property to 50%. I'll save the changes, check the project, and as you can see, it places it on the right side, but I want it centered. So to do that, we'll use the transform property, followed by the translate function on the x-axis because it's the horizontal part, and we'll set it to minus 50%. I'll save the changes, check, and as you can see, the image is now horizontally centered. Let's move on to the next block of the card, which in this case is the content description. Here we see something very particular, which is 3 dots at the end of the string. This means it is a much larger text, which has been cut with CSS to fit only 3 lines. To do this, we'll go to our HTML document, and here we have the container with the class cardBody, in which we'll place our p tag and we'll put some placeholder tags with lorem ipsum. I'll save the changes, check the project, and we see that in this case, the text is very extensive. If I want only the first 3 lines to be visible, we'll do the following. We go to our style sheet, and at the bottom, we'll add the class cardBody. The first property we'll incorporate could be the display property, and we'll set it to WebKit-box. I'll save the changes, and the next step could be to limit the number of lines of the text. For that, we'll use the WebKit line clamp property. Here it is. And we'll set it to 3 lines maximum. After this, we'll add the property. Although, for now, I'll save the changes to see what we're seeing. If we check the project, we don't see any changes at all. Now, to display the 3 dots, here we'll add the following property. WebKit box orient. It should be around here. Well, I'll complete it. This should be dash box. -orient, and we set it to vertical. I'll save the changes, check, and as you can see, we now have the 3 dots on the third line. If we want to hide the remaining lines from the fourth on guards, we'll add the overflow property to the card body, and we set it to hidden. I'll save the changes, check the project, and as you can see, we now only see the content inside the card. But there's a detail. We're still seeing the fourth line of text, which I don't want to see. The issue is because the card body has padding at the bottom. To remove this line, we simply remove that padding. So we go to the index.html, and here in the card body, we'll add the class pb0 to remove the bottom padding. I'll save the changes, check the project, and as you can see, we no longer see that line. Now we'll replace that removed bottom padding with an outer margin. For that, we'll add MB and we'll try setting it to 3. I'll save the changes, check, and as you can see, we've regained the bottom space. But we no longer see the fourth line. Now we'll change the font of the text because we see that it's a different font. For that, we'll go to our style sheet. And here we're going to import the second font I've provided. We add the font face rule, here it is. We navigate to the assets folder, then to the fonts folder, and it will be called Freight. So we call it. And I'll name the font with the same name, which is all of this. I'll paste and replace. I'll add the important expression, save the changes, and now I'll create a class to define this font. So we copy it again and we create a class called FF for font family and its name. I'll open and close curly braces, paste, and now I'll put the name here on the side. I'll save the changes, copy the class, and we'll paste it in the p tag, right here. I'll save the changes, check the project, and as you can see, we've changed the font of the text. We'll go back to the HTML document to increase the font size a bit. For that, we add the style attribute and we set the font size property to 1.1 rem. I'll save the changes, check the project. Now it's an appropriate size. The next step would be to increase the font weight a bit. For that, the font weight property is set to 900. I'll save the changes, check. I think it's too much. I'll set it to 700. It's still too much. I'll set it to 500. I'll leave it there at 500. Finally, we move on to the last section, which is to incorporate these two elements with borders at the top and bottom. For that, we go to the HTML document, and below the div with the card body class, we create a card footer class. I'll save the changes, and here we'll create another container with the dflex class. And inside, we'll place the first text containing the word search for. I'll save the changes, and we move on to the next text on the other end that says time 25 minutes. I'll save the changes, check the project, and as you can see, here are the taxes. Next is to place these two elements at each end. For that, in the parent container, justify content, and in this case, instead of center, we put between. I'll save the changes, check, and as you can see, the elements are at the ends. I think instead of using the span tag, I'll change it to the small tag to make it a bit smaller. I'll verify, that seems perfect. And finally, we just need to remove the border at the top of this card. For that, we'll add the style attribute and we set the border top property to 0 pixels. Or even better, to none. I'll save the changes, check, and as you can see, we no longer see the border. Here we need one more correction, which is to set all 3 sections to the same background color. For that, we go to the style sheet, to the card rule, we copy the background color property, and we're going to create a class called bg1. We open and close curly braces and we paste. We save the changes, copy the class, and we paste it into each of them, starting with the card header. We'll also place it in the card body and also in the card footer. I'll save the changes, check, and as you can see here, there's something missing, and it is that, obviously, this blank space appears here because we've set a margin button of 3. We'll remove this, and instead of that, at the bottom, we'll set a padding top of 3, recovering the space we removed. I'll save the changes, check, and as you can see, it's there. Although, what we just did is not correct because remember that we're going to add a border at the top and bottom of these two elements. So, if we add this class pt3, which sets a padding top, the spacing of the top border will be very different from the bottom one. and it will be distorted. What we can do is to revert the changes. We remove this class and we add the class MB3 back to the card body. We save the changes, check, and we're seeing this white stripe again. To solve this, we simply add the class BG1 to the card. If we save the changes now, check, as you can see, it disappears. Now we'll finish by adding the borders. For that, we go to the parent container of these two elements, which is the dflex, and we add a border top and also a border button. We'll save the changes, check the project, and as you can see, we're already seeing the lines, but they're too close to the content. To change this, we add the py3 class, which adds padding on the top and bottom. I'll save the changes, check, and as you can see, I think it's too much. I'll set it to 2 now, and I think the spacing now is correct. Finally, we'll create some separation from the top so it's not too close. So on the card footer, we'll add a PB2. I'll save the changes, check. It didn't increase at all. I'll set it to 3. Check again, and now we see it's increasing a bit. I think that's correct. The next step would be to create the remaining columns, which are 2, because there should be 3 cards. For this, we go to the HTML document, copy this column, and we'll paste it 2 more times. In the second column, we'll change the image to number 2, and to the last one to image number 3. I'll save the changes, check, and as you can see, the images are here. Now we'll change the background color. For that, we'll go to the style sheet and we create a class called BG2. We set the background color property and we add a hashtag and the following hexadecimal code. I'll save the changes. We go to the second column and we change the class BG1 to 2. Also in the card header, in the body, and also in the footer. I'll save the changes, check, and as you can see, the background color has been changed here. Now we'll move on to the last one. For this, we'll go back to the style sheet and we create a class called BG3. Opening and closing curly braces, the background color property, hashtag, and we add that hexadecimal code. Finally, we also change the class to BG3 in the last column, here as well. And finally, in the footer. I'll save the changes, check, and as you can see, each card now has a different color. Next, we'll position the middle card slightly higher than the other two on the sides. For this, we'll go to the second column, we add the style attribute, and to achieve this, we use the transform property, the translate function on the y-axis, and we set it to -30 pixels. I'll also remove the background color from the body, so we'll go to the style sheet and remove this class because I don't like it. I'll save the changes, check, and as you can see, now the middle card is positioned above the other two. The next step is to slightly rotate the first and third images or cards. We go to the first column, we add the style attribute, the transform property, we use the rotate function and we set it to 1 degree. I'll save the changes, check, and as you can see, we already see a slight rotation in the first card. Now we'll move on to the third one. We'll copy all of this and paste it in the third column, changing the rotation angle to -2 degrees. I'll save the changes, check, and as you can see, we're seeing the position of the cards correctly. The next step before moving on to the hover effects is to make the images or cards a little smaller. For this, we could increase the padding on the sides so that it fits a little better. So we'll try setting the px5 class in the first column. I'll save the changes, check, and as you can see, it's a bit smaller now. We'll copy the class and we'll paste it in the remaining columns. I'll save the changes, check, and as you can see, they're there. With this, we could smoothly move on to the hover effect. What we'll do is that, when hovering over any card, it will move to the top. That is, it moves upwards, and also adds a shadow. So well, for this, we'll go to our style sheet. At the bottom, we add the card class, opening and closing curly braces, followed by a colon and the hover pseudo class. Here it is. First, we'll add the UpGuard movement. We set the transform property to translate on the y-axis to -15 pixels. I'll save the changes, and now if we check and hover over it, as you can see, it moves upward. Next, we'll add the shadow. For this, we use the box shadow property and we set it to 0. After this, we set the next value to 40 pixels, then 30 pixels and 0, followed by the color of the shadow. we'll use the RGBA format. Here it is. We set it to 44, 44, 44, and the opacity to 0.8. Or well, I'll set it to 0.3. I'll save the changes, check, hover over it, and as you can see, we have the shadow with the up guard movement. To smooth out the abrupt movement, we add a transition. We go to the card, specifically to the card class. And here we add the transition property and we set it to 500 milliseconds. And we also add an easing effect. I'll save the changes, check, and as you can see, when hovering, we see the movement with an effect. Well, I hope you like this card, where we've completed it entirely.